The sun beat down on the dry, endless stretch of desert below, the wind carrying the faint smell of burnt metal and dust. Among the ruins of a once great city, a lone figure moved with purpose. His boots left deep imprints in the sand, his steps heavy, but his movements precise. This was a place where few people dared to venture, a place where the sun had claimed every bit of life it could. It was a fitting place for someone like him. The mercenary was no stranger to this world of danger and death. His past had been built on shadows and silence. An orphan with no name, no family, just a memory of a world lost. His parents had died when he was too young to remember. He had been left behind, abandoned, on a dying planet far from here. He didn't care about his past anymore. There was no time for memories, not when survival was his only concern. He had learned early that the only thing you could trust in life was your skills, and his were sharper than most. He was an expert with weapons, tactics, and survival, and he had built a name for himself among mercenaries across the galaxy. They called him Ghost because he moved without a trace, and when his job was done, he was gone as if he had never been there at all. Today, he was on a mission to rescue a high-profile target. He didn't know much about the person he was sent to save, only that they were important. The pay was good, and that was enough for him. That's all it ever was. No questions, no strings attached. As he reached the coordinates, he checked his weapons, making sure everything was in place. His rifle was locked and loaded, his knives sharp and ready, and his pistol was tucked securely at his side. He was always prepared. It was the only thing that kept him alive. He crouched low as he approached the compound. The place was heavily guarded, but that didn't faze him. He dealt with worse. The guards were no match for him. Moving like a shadow, he slipped inside the perimeter, using the cover of darkness to avoid detection. In the dim light of the compound, he could hear voices ahead. He moved closer, his steps silent on the cold metallic floor. The target was inside, but so were several others. He had to be careful. One wrong move, and the mission would be compromised. Peeking around a corner, he saw them, a group of soldiers standing guard outside a room. The mercenary frowned. The target was inside, but getting in without alerting the guards would be tricky. He waited patiently, watching their movements, his sharp eyes picking up every detail. Then, something caught his attention. Among the guards, there was one woman who stood out. She wasn't like the others. There was something about her, an air of authority. Her posture was confident, and her eyes sharp. He couldn't place it, but there was a feeling in the pit of his stomach that told him he had seen her before. It was a strange sensation, like a memory that was just out of reach. He shook it off. It didn't matter. He had a job to do, and the job came first. The mercenary waited for the right moment to strike. When the guards turned away, he moved in, fast and silent. One by one, he took them down, knocking them out with swift, calculated moves. His actions were precise, practiced. He had done this countless times before. Finally, he reached the door where the target was being held. With a single motion, he disabled the lock and slipped inside. There, in the dim light of the room, was the person he had come to save. But the moment he saw them, something inside him froze. It was her, the woman, from outside. For a split second, their eyes locked. His heart skipped a beat, though he quickly masked his shock. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the moment stretched on, and she stared at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with recognition. She knew him. That much was clear. The woman's lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she stepped back, her hands trembling. The mercenary stood there frozen in place, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't supposed to be part of the plan. He wasn't supposed to be recognizing anyone here, but this was no ordinary person he had come to save. This was the Queen. The mercenary's mind raced. He had never been told who the target was, but now it was clear. She was the one he had saved years ago, when she was just a young princess, lost and alone. He had been just a boy back then, but he remembered her face as if it was yesterday. She had been the daughter of a powerful ruler, caught in the midst of a rebellion. The entire palace had been in chaos, but somehow he had found her. She had been terrified, and he had protected her with everything he had. But in the end, he was forced to leave her behind. The fighting had been too fierce. He never thought he would see her again. And yet, here she was, the queen. Her voice was shaky as she spoke.
You're alive? The mercenary didn't know what to say. He didn't expect this.
He had thought about that day over the years, but never expected it to catch up with him like this. He had moved on. He had buried that part of his past long ago. But now, standing in front of him, was the person who had once been the reason for everything he did. He took a step back, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. This was bad. He couldn't afford to let emotions get in the way. "I'm here to get you out," he said, his voice cold. But the queen didn't move. Instead, she looked at him with a mix of disbelief and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with the weight of years. The mercenary turned away, not wanting to look at her anymore. This wasn't part of the plan. This was a distraction, a dangerous one. "I don't owe you anything," he muttered, stepping closer to her. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't true. She had been a part of his past, a part of him that he had tried to forget. But now, with her standing in front of him, it was impossible to ignore. "I'll get you out," he said again, this time with more certainty. He had a mission to finish, and he couldn't let anything stand in his way. But the queen's gaze didn't falter. "You saved me once. Don't you remember?" He did remember, more than she could possibly know. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was getting her out of here and keeping her alive. Whatever feelings he had for her, whatever memories he carried, would have to wait. For now, survival was all that mattered, and the mission was far from over. The mercenary could feel the weight of the queen's gaze on him. He tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. Her eyes were full of disbelief, and he could see that her mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. For years he had buried the memories of that day. It had been a moment of survival, nothing more. He was just a boy, alone in the chaos of a rebellion, trying to protect a frightened princess. He had never expected anything in return. In fact, he had never thought he would see her again. But now, here she was, grown into a powerful queen, standing before him as if nothing had changed. The queen's voice trembled slightly as she spoke again. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say who you were? Why didn't you say who you were?" He wanted to answer, but the words stuck in his throat. It was easier not to talk about the past. It was easier to remain distant, to keep his emotions in check. He had spent so many years running from his past, from the boy he had been. The mercenary was the man he had chosen to be, and the man he was now didn't have time for old memories. "I don't need a title," he finally said, his voice low. "I'm here to do a job. That's it." He turned away, trying to focus on the mission. The room was still too quiet. They couldn't afford to stay here for much longer. The longer they lingered, the more likely it was that someone would find them. The queen's safety was his priority now. The queen took a step forward, her eyes never leaving him. "You don't understand," she said softly.
You saved me. You don't know how much that meant.
He turned back to her, but his expression remained cold. "It doesn't matter," It's in the past. Right now, we need to get you out of here. The words were harsh, but they were true. He couldn't let himself get distracted. The Queen's gratitude, the memories of that day, those were things he could not afford to think about, not when there were lives at stake. Still, as the mercenary moved closer to the door, he felt a strange pull in his chest. He couldn't ignore it. The Queen was not just any royal. She was someone who had been a part of his past, someone who had once relied on him. He had promised to protect her then, and here he was again, facing the same responsibility. The mercenary gritted his teeth. He couldn't afford to feel anything. "I'll get you out," he repeated, trying to sound firm, but his voice wavered slightly. The Queen nodded, though she still looked uncertain.
"You're right.
But we can't just leave without answers. There's so much I need to understand. Why you're here. Why you've been hiding. Why you never... I don't owe you an explanation. I'm here to protect you. That's all." The Queen's eyes softened. "I don't think it's that simple, is it?" The mercenary didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. The past was a dangerous place to visit, and he couldn't afford to go back there. Not now. Not when they were so close to freedom. He moved toward the exit, his hand on the door. The Queen stood there for a moment, watching him, and then followed, silently. There was no time to waste. The longer they stayed, the more dangerous things would become. Outside, the moonlight bathed the compound in an eerie glow. The mercenary knew they couldn't afford to stay in the open for long. The compound was heavily guarded, and he had to get the Queen to safety, fast. The silence between them grew thick as they walked. He kept his pace steady, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. It was second nature to him. He couldn't let his guard down, not for a second. The Queen, on the other hand, was quiet. She didn't speak, but he could feel the weight of her thoughts, the questions she had for him.
"Where are we going?" she asked after a long silence, her voice cutting through the stillness.
The mercenary didn't look at her. "To the safe house. It's the fastest route. We'll be safe there." The Queen nodded, though her expression was full of uncertainty.
"And after that?"
He hesitated. "We'll figure it out." It was a vague answer, but it was the only one he could give her. He couldn't make promises, not when things were still so unpredictable. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and nothing was certain. They reached the edge of the compound where the safe house was hidden in the shadows. The mercenary led the Queen inside, quickly locking the door behind them. Inside, it was dark and quiet. The safe house wasn't much, just a small, secluded room with enough supplies to last for a few days. It was the kind of place he had come to rely on when things got complicated. And right now, things were very complicated. He moved toward the corner of the room and began checking his weapons, making sure everything was in place. The Queen stood by the door, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't speak, but he could feel her eyes on him, her curiosity, her confusion. "You must have a million questions," he said, his voice gruff. The Queen didn't answer right away. Then, finally, she spoke. "Why didn't you contact me? After everything we went through, you saved my life. You were my hero. But you disappeared. You left me." The mercenary's heart tightened at the words, but he didn't let it show. He couldn't afford to feel that way. "You're a queen now," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You don't need a mercenary in your life." "I did what I had to do. And now I'm doing what I do best. I'm here to protect you, nothing more." Her eyes searched his face.
"Is that really all? After everything?" He looked away.
The Queen seemed to consider this for a long moment before speaking again. "You don't have to do this alone, you know. I'm not just a queen. I'm a person. And you don't have to keep running from your past. Not anymore. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so many years running, hiding in the shadows. The idea of facing his past, of accepting help, was something he had never considered. But now, in the quiet of the safe house, with the weight of her gaze on him, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to do it all alone. For a moment, the mercenary let himself believe it. But only for a moment. He quickly pushed the thought aside. There was too much at stake.
Too much to do. We'll talk later, he said, his voice cold once more.
Right now, we need to figure out our next move. The queen nodded, though she didn't look convinced. The silence between them stretched again, but this time, it felt different. There was a quiet understanding, a recognition of what had been left unsaid. Outside, the sounds of the night continued, but inside, everything felt still, as if the weight of their past was holding them both in place. The night seemed endless. The quiet of the safe house felt heavier than ever. Outside, the wind howled against the walls, but inside there was only the sound of their breathing. The queen stood by the window, looking out into the darkness, while the mercenary sat across the room sharpening his knives. His mind wasn't on the task at hand, though. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about how everything had changed. They had spent years apart, and now here they were, trapped together in a small, secluded room, with only the shadows to keep them company. He had saved her once, long ago, and now it seemed fate had thrown them together again. The queen didn't seem to be in a hurry to speak. She stood quietly, her hands clasped behind her back, as if trying to find the right words. Finally, she turned to face him, her expression soft, yet serious. "You're different," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can see it. The boy I once knew is gone, replaced by this mercenary."
But it's more than that, isn't it? Something changed in you. He didn't answer right away.
He didn't want to. What could he say? That he had become someone who had learned to survive at any cost? That he had buried his past so deep that it barely even mattered anymore? That the boy she remembered was just a ghost, long lost in the harsh world he had built for himself. "I do what I have to do," he said at last, his voice cold. "I don't need anyone's help, and I certainly don't need to explain myself." The queen stepped closer, her eyes fixed on him. "But I need to understand. I need to know why you've been hiding from me. From all of us. You saved my life." "You should have been at my side when I became queen." He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. The truth was, he didn't know why. It was too complicated to explain, and too painful to relive. He had thought that if he stayed away, if he didn't look back, he could escape the weight of the past.
But standing here now, in this safe house, with her words hanging in the air, it felt impossible to keep running.
"I never wanted anything from you," he muttered. "I didn't save you for any reason other than to survive. You don't need to feel obligated to me." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He couldn't deny the truth of their shared past. The moment when he had saved her from that burning palace, when he had made sure she was safe, even though it meant risking his own life. He had done it because she was important, because her survival meant something to him. He just didn't know how to admit it now. The queen's face softened, but there was still a sadness in her eyes.
"I didn't think you would be like this," she said quietly. I thought maybe we could pick up where we left off."
Maybe we could figure out who we are together. But you're shutting me out. He stood up, his chair scraping across the floor. "You don't know what it's like," he said, his voice rising.
"You've always had a future. You've always had people who would protect you, people who would take care of you."
I never had that. I had nothing but my own hands to rely on.
His fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment he felt the heat of anger rush through him. He wanted to shout, to tell her that she had no idea what it had been like to grow up alone, to survive by any means necessary. He wanted to tell her how hard it had been to bury everything he had ever felt just to stay alive. But instead, he took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. The anger wasn't going to help. He couldn't let it control him. Not now, not when they needed to focus on staying alive. The Queen watched him, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm sorry," she said softly.
I didn't mean to make you angry.
"I didn't mean to make you angry. I just want to understand. I want to know why you've changed, why you left everything behind." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "It doesn't matter. What matters now is getting you out of here. You can't stay in this safe house forever. We need to move before they find us." The Queen didn't say anything for a moment, but he could feel the weight of her gaze on him. She was watching him, studying him as if she was trying to figure him out, trying to understand what had happened to the boy who had saved her life.
I don't know how to help you, she said finally, but I want to.
"You've been alone for so long, but you don't have to be. Not anymore." He shook his head. "You don't get it. I've survived this long by keeping everyone at arm's length. I can't just let anyone in. Not even you." The Queen's expression hardened for a moment, but then she stepped forward, her voice firm. "Maybe it's time to stop running then. Maybe it's time to let someone help you." He didn't answer. He couldn't. The words were stuck in his throat. There was too much he needed to say. But he wasn't ready to say it. Not yet. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. The mercenary could hear the sound of his heartbeat in his ears, the adrenaline from earlier still coursing through his veins. Finally, the Queen spoke again.
"We need to talk about what's happening."
"About what's coming. There are forces at work here that neither of us can ignore." He turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath.
"There's a threat to the throne. There are enemies who want to see me fall."
"And they're coming for us, whether we're ready or not." The mercenary felt a chill run down his spine. He had known something was wrong, but hearing her say it out loud made it all the more real. They weren't safe here. They never would be. "What kind of enemies?" he asked, his voice low. The Queen's eyes met his. "The kind who would do anything to take power. And they have the resources to make it happen." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll need a plan. And we need to move fast." The Queen didn't argue. She knew that this was the only way. They couldn't waste any more time. The mercenary had always been someone who worked in the shadows, but now he had to step into the light, at least for a moment. And if they were going to survive, they had to work together. "We'll make it out of here," the mercenary said, his voice steady. "But we have to be smart. We can't let them catch us off guard." The Queen nodded, her face set with determination. "Then let's get to work." And with that, the mercenary knew that things were about to get even harder. But for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely alone. The wind howled outside, shaking the walls of the safe house. The quiet had been replaced by a sense of urgency, a tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The mercenary stood by the window, his eyes scanning the night, every part of him alert, every muscle tense. The world felt like it was closing in around them. And he knew time was running out. The Queen stood behind him, watching him carefully, but she didn't speak. She didn't have to. He could feel her eyes on him, feel the weight of her thoughts pressing down on him. It was strange, this connection they shared, and yet it was undeniable. They had been two separate worlds, Two people who had once been part of each other's past. Now, they were on the same path again, caught up in something far bigger than either of them. He glanced over at her, noting the change in her demeanor. The fear that had been in her eyes earlier was gone, replaced by something else: determination. She was no longer the young princess he had saved all those years ago. She was a queen now, and the weight of that title was something she had learned to carry. There was a fire in her that matched his own, a fire that said she was ready to fight. "We need to move," he said, his voice steady. "They'll be coming for us soon. We can't stay here any longer." The queen nodded, but there was something in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. It was as if she was searching for something, as if she was trying to find the right moment to say what was on her mind. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I know what I have to do. I know what's at stake, but I can't do it alone. Not this time."
He looked at her, his eyes narrowing.
He had never expected her to say something like that. He had always seen her as someone who had everything: power, control, the ability to shape the world around her. But now, as she stood before him, he realized that she was just as human as he was. She had her own fears, her own doubts, and she was asking for help. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly, his voice softer than before. "I'm here. I'll help you." The words felt strange on his tongue, but they were true. He had always fought alone. He had always trusted no one. But now, standing beside her, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Not this time. Not when everything was on the line. The queen's gaze softened, and for a brief moment, he saw a flicker of the girl he had saved all those years ago. She was still there, beneath the queen's armor, beneath the title, and the responsibility.
She was still the same person he had promised to protect.
"You've already done more than I could have ever asked," she said, her voice filled with gratitude.
"But this is different."
"We need to work together, or we won't survive." The mercenary nodded. He didn't need to say anything more. They both knew what needed to be done.
The plan was simple, but it wasn't without risks. There was a chance they might not make it out of this alive.
But he was ready. He had always been ready for the worst. And this time, he wouldn't be facing it alone. They gathered their things quickly, making sure they had everything they needed. The queen moved with a quiet confidence, her movements precise, as if she had prepared for this moment her entire life. The mercenary watched her for a moment, wondering how she had come so far, how she had become the person she was today. He had never seen her in this light before, not as a queen, not as a leader. He had always seen her as a distant figure, someone he had saved once. But now he saw her as an equal. He grabbed his rifle and checked the ammo, making sure everything was in place. They had to leave. The longer they stayed, the more dangerous it became. Their enemies were closing in, and he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. But now, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for her, and that made all the difference. The queen turned to him, her face set in determination. "Let's go," she said, her voice calm but filled with purpose. They moved quickly, slipping through the shadows, staying low, keeping to the narrow paths that would take them away from the compound. The mercenary led the way, his eyes scanning every corner, every possible threat. The queen followed closely behind him, her steps quiet but sure. There was no hesitation in her now. She was ready. As they neared the edge of the compound, the mercenary felt a shift in the air. Something was wrong. He paused, his senses on high alert. He knew the enemy was close, but he hadn't expected them to be this close. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he heard a faint sound in the distance. Footsteps coming toward them. "Stay down," he whispered to the queen, his voice urgent. She nodded, crouching low beside him. The mercenary moved forward, his rifle ready, his mind focused on the threat ahead. He could hear the voices now, the enemy troops, closing in on their position. They weren't far. If they didn't move quickly, they would be caught.
He turned back to the queen, his eyes meeting hers.
There was no fear in her gaze, just determination. He could see it now, the strength she had hidden all these years. She wasn't the scared little princess he had saved. She was a queen, and she was ready to fight for her future. "We need to split up," he said, his voice low.
"It's the only way we'll make it," the queen nodded. "I trust you." The words hit him harder than he expected.
She trusted him. After all these years, after everything they had been through, she trusted him. "Stay close," he said, motioning for her to follow him. "We'll get through this together." And for the first time in a long time, the mercenary felt a sense of hope. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. The queen wasn't just a figure in his past. She was someone he could count on. Someone who could count on him. They moved through the compound, staying close to the shadows, avoiding the guards who were now searching for them. The mercenary's mind was sharp, his focus unyielding. Every step, every movement had to be precise. One mistake, and they would be caught. As they reached the exit, the queen paused for a moment, looking back at the compound. She took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. "This is it," she said quietly. The mercenary nodded.
"Ooh, it is. And we'll make it out."
Together, they stepped into the open, the darkness of the night surrounding them. The mercenary glanced at the queen one last time before they disappeared into the shadows, ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in years, the mercenary didn't feel like he was running. He wasn't just surviving. He was fighting for something, fighting for a future, fighting for her, fighting for the world they both wanted to protect. And as they disappeared into the night, he knew that no matter what came their way, they would face it together. The future was uncertain, but they were no longer alone.